Welcome to High Impact Philanthropy at the University of Pennsylvania. Today, we're launching our 2024 High Impact Giving Toolkit, which is an annual guide to help donors have greater impact year-round. Our discussion panel is going to be moderated by Carra Cote-Ackah, who's a senior fellow at the Center for High Impact Philanthropy and at Goldman Sachs, head of philanthropy engagement and legacy planning. Carra will moderate a discussion among CHIP's founding executive director, Katherina Rosqueta, and 3 alumni of CHIP's High Impact Philanthropy Academy: Rob Kaufold of Arlington Family Offices, Sharlene Kemler of the Loveland Foundation, and Danisha Patel of the Long Arc Foundation. We will have questions and answers at the end, so please add your questions at any time using the Q&A function on Zoom. Now, please welcome Elaine Martyn, Fidelity Charitable Senior Vice President of the Private Donor Group, who will introduce the toolkit. This webinar and the toolkit are sponsored by Fidelity Charitable.
Thanks so much, Kelly. At Fidelity Charitable, we say that impact is intentional, inclusive, and informed. And we are so proud to sponsor the Center for High Impact Philanthropy's annual toolkit, because we don't know of a better resource to help donors move from intention to action. There is a reason it's called a toolkit versus a guide. And I think it's because it's full of practical information, including decision-making frameworks, concrete examples, and resources from the field that can help anyone have more impact, no matter where they are in their philanthropic journey. We are so thrilled to be a partner with the team at the Center for High Impact Philanthropy, or CHIP, as we sometimes call it. And I'm personally excited for this roundtable discussion, where we'll hear more about the toolkit and how it can help you have greater impact in 2024 and beyond. It's my great pleasure now to hand off to Carra and our roundtable speakers. Carra, over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Elaine. I am delighted to serve as moderator for this roundtable conversation. And I'm going to start us out by launching the conversation with questions that I've prepared. And then we're going to transition to an open Q&A where you can ask questions of any of us. And so if, as we're talking, if the discussion prompts a question before we get to the Q&A, please feel free to put it into the Zoom's Q&A function at any time. And the CHIP team and I behind the scenes will also try to weave those questions into the conversation as is appropriate. Okay, let's get started. So from my experience, both advising families and as a professional grant maker, there are many considerations that individual donors and institutional funders face when deciding where and how to give. They can include tax benefits, legal constraints, concerns over legacy, family values, just to name a few. So the Center for High Impact Philanthropy and this toolkit focuses on what some refer to as philanthropy's noblest goal, and that is to create social impact. So I'm going to start question 1 to you, Kat. I understand that social impact is the ultimate goal of high impact philanthropy, but what does it really mean in practice?
Thanks, Carra. First of all, I'm so glad you said the word practice, because that's what high impact philanthropy is. It's the practice of using whatever private philanthropic resources you control to serve the public good, right? It's philanthropy, its noblest use, which is to make the world a better place. And, whether you are new to this practice of high impact philanthropy, or you're somebody like Danisha who signed up for our listserv 7 years ago and is one of the alumni of our High Impact Philanthropy Academy, the practice is really characterized by 4 things. The first is exactly as you said, Carra. It's intentionally focusing on how you're going to make the world a better place. That's just plain speak for social impact, right? Lots of other considerations, tax, legacy, etc. But when you're practicing high impact philanthropy, you are intentionally trying to understand how are you creating positive change in the world. That's the first principle. The other 3 principles are using the best available evidence, broadly defined, to inform your decisions, right? All the causes that donors and professional grant makers are focused on today, whether it's interrupting intergenerational poverty, addressing climate change, homelessness, advancing opportunity for those who have been left out. these are tough issues. And so the only chance you have of having impact is to build on what we already know. And that's what I mean by using the best available evidence to inform your decisions. You don't want to pay for a mistake somebody else has made, which gets us to the third principle. And this is no surprise, as a center that's housed here at a School of Social Policy and Practice, but founded by folks from the Wharton School. You're always thinking impact and cost. You're linking those two, because there's no one donor or one foundation or one public charity that has enough financial resources to create the change they want to see. So that means each one of us has to be thinking about, ooh, given what I have, how far can this go in creating change, right? And learning for opportunities where you can make those resources go even farther. And that sort of takes us to the fourth principle, which is, as I said earlier, these are often intractable, or feel like intractable societal problems. So if you're going to make progress, you sort of have to adopt an attitude of lifelong learning, right? Like any other practice, the more you do it, the stronger those muscles get, the more success you have. So focus on social impact, decisions informed by the best available evidence. Always linking considerations of impact and cost so you can find the really great opportunities, and consider yourself a lifelong learner of how to create social change.
So helpful, Kat. And we've got a whole mix of people who are applying all those various pieces in our work. So Sharlene, I'm coming over to you next. You are a recent alumna of the High Impact Philanthropy Academy, and the foundation you lead just completed its fourth granting year. So congratulations on that. And so you are actively practicing. Let's talk about that. How have you woven the principles of high impact philanthropy into your practice?
Really, it's the DNA of the entire foundation, because really it was doing our landscape analysis and seeing what were the needs, where can we create the systems that will create the ease with the abundance, and really listening to our audience is really key. So for us, we really noticed that there was a gap in terms of access for mental health support. And unfortunately, it's still considered a luxury item. So how can we as a foundation address that need? And we basically really brought in amazing therapy directory partners to collectively work together for us to be able to figure out what was a reasonable rate that we could be able to pay therapists, because free is not sustainable, nor is it equitable. So for us, it was really kind of listening to the professionals within their field and really figuring out what's the exact number of therapy sessions we could be able to provide our participants to create the generational change and healing we want to see within that group. And that's something that we monitor, throughout all of our entire cohorts, is really getting the feedback from the therapists and getting the feedback from the participants. And that's really what helps us build out how we are granting. How many vouchers do we provide? Is 12 vouchers enough? Will that create the generational change that we want to have within the community? And it's also coming in and taking in that feedback and applying it into advocacy. One of the things I love about what we do is that when it comes to philanthropy, we want to see how far can we actually make this dollar go. And really being able to see, okay, not only are we supporting the journey of someone on their mental health quest, but we're also providing economic mobility for BIPOC therapists. So it's a way where we're able to not only just support one, but we can actually not only, because we're supporting one demographic, we're actually tangibly helping the same demographic at the same time with economic mobility. And I think that's what we're trying to have with philanthropy, is to create that social change that we want to see. And that's really why I say the 4 pillars really is like the foundation. It's the base. Then you get the board on top of it. But when we're really thinking as you're building, that's the foundation, it's the base, it's really what allows sustainability and long-term sustainability, because mental wellness is not a quick fix.
Well said, my friend. Well said. And thank you for sharing how that really comes to life in your practice. Okay, over to you, Rob, because you've got a different view, a different perspective on this. You have leadership roles in both single family offices and now a multifamily office. And so in those roles, you're working with families who are seeking greater impact with their giving. So how do you use this toolkit?
Thanks, Carra. The way that this toolkit is helpful to us is that in the multifamily, in single family office world, when I work with that, you work with one family, you can develop their values and their interests and go deep into ideas and strategies and outcomes that you're trying to seek. When you're working with multifamilies, there's a whole sort of basket of different interests that are out there or different value work that they've done. And so the toolkit helps provide a little bit of guidance about what does that actually look like to investigate a charity? What are the right questions to ask? How do you actually do that? How do you get examples within environment or mental health, like the work that Sharlene's doing, physical health? How do those things kind of apply in their bigger perspective? And then for me, how do I, because as Kat said, this whole work is a practice. So how do we practice seeing how a value of a family as a collective family, also as individual family members, connect to philanthropic work? And the reason why I follow that path is to see what is sustainable in the long term. What's a long-term giving strategy? What's something that maybe needs immediate response, but also needs longevity in it as well? And when you connect that work to your values, and then you connect it to the right charity work, that has sustaining qualities for a long period of time. And so I use the guide to help view those things, view the plays, view the ideas of and examples of charities that are doing excellent work, and then apply it to their own portfolio, as well as maybe there's some quick connections that are already made because these organizations already fit a value, and then quick answers can be made as well. So it's really is a toolkit and a toolkit towards practice of helping multiple families get to their philanthropic purposes and goals.
Yep, that is my experience as well, where with focusing on the key principles, they can be applied, as Sharlene said, to what she's working on, or the way in which you're working on it. It is the application of the principles, the evidence from beneficiaries, the learning, the efficiency. I mean, it holds across groups and across topics, which is pretty outstanding. Danisha, going over to you next, because like Rob and Sharlene, you are an alum of the High Impact Philanthropy Academy, but long before you participated in the Academy, you've been using the Center's toolkit and accessing it. So how have you been using it?
Yeah, so I guess we, as a family, have been using it originally many years ago as I got the kids to read it and sort of do pitch sessions, describing like which one is your favorite, what are your values, trying to figure out what we as a family were passionate about. And we've sort of evolved every year with the guidance that Chip provides us. And so today, or I guess at least 3-4 years ago, we evolved to trust-based philanthropy and unrestricted funding, and moving beyond the idea that X dollars will get you X services, and how do you go to operationally unrestricted funding for these nonprofits. So that was like the first transformation. And that was really a large part of what, the guidance that we received from Chip. But I'd say this particular toolkit is phenomenal because it really allows us to almost have these models of real exemplars that may be applicable in our own communities in different ways and based on your own cause preferences and your own passions for different issue areas, and how you can take those models and really apply them to what your interests and passions are. So that's been really amazing. I also love this toolkit because I like the part about the role philanthropy plays in specifically as compared to maybe the government's role or fee-for-service program. So you really see how philanthropy is harnessing a change in movement and taking these organizations to the next level. And that was, I think, really helpful and, really showing that we're all this integrated system and we can move into that practice and make real movement and change. So.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for walking us through the evolution of your family and how you've been involved with it. I've certainly seen evolution in my time being engaged with the center. It's, gosh, I think going on 15 years now, I've been fortunate to be involved. And Kat, one of the things that is interesting to me is that this toolkit actually does something a little bit different this year in how the center presents its 4 philanthropic plays framework. So tell us a little bit about that, how you came to that.
Yeah, it gets to what Danisha just talked about, which is the role that philanthropy plays. And what we discovered is a framework we had developed and we'd been teaching in High Impact Philanthropy Academy is one that could be useful to anybody, right? Even if they're not going to enroll in the academy. And that's this notion that there are 4 different ways philanthropy creates social impact or that positive change. And each of them are valid paths to impact. But there are trade-offs. And so what we discovered is that some people only knew of one way or another way. And there was also almost like people have probably heard this. Well, I'd rather teach someone to fish instead of giving them a fish. Well, what's interesting when you have a doctor as a member of the founding team, a doctor is going to save a life and be interested in a vaccine. So this sort of false trade-off that we kept seeing, we wanted to address head on. So the 4 philanthropic plays are philanthropy can provide direct services, right? That is sort of, as Sharlene was describing, right? To provide access to needed therapy for those who have not had access before, right? Direct service. But philanthropy can also strengthen a whole system. So it would be something like, what if all pediatricians were now trained to identify early markers of mental health issues among moms and young children, right? That's not direct service per se, but that is strengthening the capacity of a system to help. Another would be philanthropy can advance better policies and advocate for change. So why is it that insurance companies don't reimburse mental health care at the same rates that they'll reimburse physical health care? Does that make sense? Let's advocate for changes to that. Let's see if there's new policies. And then finally, philanthropy has and can and is always needed in research and innovation. Right. We have an outstanding example recently, the COVID vaccine, right? Game changing, right? Affecting the globe. So those are the 4 plays. And, you will see results sooner with confidence with direct service. On the other end of the spectrum, you could spend the way the Gates Foundation has for almost 30 years trying to get a malaria vaccine. And you may only learn what doesn't work literally for decades. Both matter, but I think donors and professional grant makers have to know that those are all valid options and then really say to themselves, how patient am I? What's my risk tolerance? Right? Those are some of the things that help people determine which of those 4 plays they're going to back.
Really interesting in terms of the reflective side of this and how people kind of evolved. Danisha, I'm curious what you're thinking there.
Yeah.
No,
it really resonates with me because recently we, made an investment. And so we've really morphed again because of a lot of based on Chip's guidance. And we always try to make sure that we integrate at least 2 of those components. So whether it's usually direct services with some level of capacity building and advocacy and policy. So we no longer will make an investment that's just direct services. So we really try to make sure that the organizations we support place real sincere emphasis on the other 2 plays, which is systems building and advocacy. So we made an investment in Clarkston Community Health Center, which is a clinic that serves a large a population in Atlanta, Georgia, largely refugee population. Time Magazine has actually recently named it the most diverse 1 square mile in America. And, for me, it was, I could because I could see the system at that point. Like it wasn't just that, okay, we're funding healthcare equity. It's more than that. It's that the providers themselves are gaining so much cultural competency with their exposure to all of the diversity and the people that they're around. And there's over, I think, 30 languages spoken in like just in the center itself. And so you can only imagine what the providers themselves, the doctors and nurses, the PAs, the volunteers from the community, whether the university or just existing providers, what they gain and how that transfers into where they eventually go and practice and those learnings. So you see that whole system. On top of it, they're also advocating for just better investments into the healthcare sector because Georgia apparently right now, according to Fortune magazine's ranks 50 out of 50 in healthcare services. So for me, that was, our family, we decided that was a really good play for us because we were going to be able to build systems building. There's going to be advocacy. It's just like Sharlene's example. You're not just benefiting the beneficiary community, but actually the providers are learning so much as they are exposed to such the wealth of diversity and community that they're exposed to. So for me, it was, again, this whole system. And that has really been because of these 4 plays.
So I'll jump on that with Danisha as well, and add to what Kat and Danisha have both shared is that I'm a systems thinker. My accounting background requires me to think in systems, and the play actually allows me to demonstrate to the clients in the single family office of where support comes from across the timeline. No individual charity is supported by one donor. It's supported by many donors, all with different values, all with different intentions. And so the plays allow me to have conversations, as Kat said, about risk and timeline. Sometimes there's direct service needs and immediate actions that need to be taken, short-term goals, short-term gains, like that meets. But when you're working with research or innovation, or even policy advocacy, or building system capacity, that's a longer-term commitment. And so understanding where your dollars go, or your volunteer hours, or whatever contribution you're making to the nonprofit, does it align with the same timeline that the nonprofit needs to get that to a decision? And in systems innovation work, sometimes that decision is like, that didn't work, or it's not working for this population, so we need to make an adjustment. That's critical information to understand whenever you're doing any of your work. So within that system is really understanding, when you work with families, is where is your risk tolerance, as Kat said, and where is your patience? Do you need something from an impact that's seen really quickly? And also, as we talked about a little earlier, where do your values align? Is it like, I want to see, as Danisha saying, systematic change in healthcare in Georgia? Well, that's a long-term commitment. Everybody would say that. But where are there small wins along the way to actually show you're making progress, even if it's not impact as it's found, but you're actually making progress, adding value. And the last I'll add to this conversation here is convening power is critical in all of these things. And so philanthropy is a team sport. And so this guide and toolkit allows all of us to have somewhat of a common language to talk about, oh, I know what you're talking about, direct services. Oh, we're doing system capacity building here. And that helps to kind of get the grant making into a simpler form to get it out the door faster. And that's, again, part of the goals for this toolkit, as well as with each of the examples, the 9 examples that are in the toolkit. Each of them has a section that says, how does philanthropy help? And you can see, when you know what the plays say, oh, I know, this is direct services. And as Danisha said, a lot of times it's 2. Like, there's a little bit of direct services, and there's a little bit of system capacity building, and sometimes some research and innovation. So the guide gives you some, and toolkit gives you some ideas about actually how to implement this with your families, how to understand risk and understand your timeline, which again helps facilitate giving to get there quicker.
Fantastic. Excellent points, and actually got me to where I was where I was thinking I'd go with the next question, which is around the toolkit does have very practical ways that you can use the principles and you can use, all of what's in there in the plays to better understand who you are. And then it also gives some exemplars, so you can really understand what does this look like. And it's in the toolkit, and it's in the PDF, and it's on the microsite. But I probably not everybody's familiar with, what is a nonprofit exemplar, and how can donors use them and so on. So Kat, can you maybe just give us a sense of how you think about it and how this comes to life through those?
Yeah. So there are over 1 million nonprofit organizations just in the United States, and we couldn't possibly analyze every single one of them, right? So, but what we could do is to analyze a set of what we call exemplars. And so the purpose of the exemplar is to give really concrete examples of how philanthropy is creating change, positive change across a range of geographies, across a range of cause areas. That's the, sometimes some of these frameworks or tools, in the absence of like, give me a real example, can feel too abstract. So that's the point of the exemplars. And the way you could use them is every single one of those exemplars in and of itself would be a great organization to give to. We source each exemplar from our institutional partners. So big shout out to our two longstanding institutional partners, the Littman Family Prize and the Greenlight Fund. So they share with us all of their due diligence, and then we independently analyze them and then turn them into an exemplar, which includes not only a description of that organization's work and a sense of how how effective and efficient they are, but we'll also pull out where could you find other organizations like this? Or where else is this model applicable? What are lessons learned that you could bring to an organization you're already funding? Because we know practically, I don't care how great an organization is in Philadelphia, if you're somebody like Danisha and you are committed to addressing health in your home state of Georgia, you're not going to fund the Philadelphia organization. You're going to learn from that one and figure out how can I take that practice and model to the community I care about. So that's why we call them exemplars. They're meant to either, if you're looking for a great organization, here's one. If you're trying to understand what a great organization looks like or how this model could apply to what you care about, we also talk about that in the exemplars.
That's awesome, and actually really ties to a question that somebody posed. And again, thank you for putting your questions as you have them into the Q&A, participants. But there was a question around sort of accountability and diligence and your relationship with an organization that is both the kind of trust-based philanthropy that Danisha mentioned earlier, that is absolutely trusting their leadership, yet making sure you're doing the right kind of research and diligence to get the best organization that fits what you want to do. In my work, we sometimes say trust but edify. That's how we explain it. But Sharlene, I know you've thought a lot about these exemplars too. So maybe over to you to think about how they apply to your work or how you think about them.
Yeah, it really comes down to what I loved about the exemplars is that it actually provides donors the ability to actually know what to look for, and have these examples, and it actually takes off that additional burden on the nonprofit, which I don't think people think about, because there's a lot going on the nonprofit side that they're already dealing with, that having a donor come in with these kind of principles and having these examples to kind of be like, okay, this is what I'm seeing. Your nonprofit kind of aligns with this exemplar. You should kind of be at these kind of key pivotal moments. Maybe you're not, but then you can at least ask the questions and the correct questions so that you're not wasting the donor's time or the nonprofit's time. And for us, it's really coming down to making sure that we are creating ease with the systems. Like Rob said, he loves a system. On the foundation side, for us, we love systems. Our whole goal is creating systems with ease for folks that need access to resources. That is our major thing. So for us, it's always getting that constant feedback from our participants and therapists, but also getting the feedback from our donors in terms of seeing where we've been putting our money and being very clear and intentional of how we're spending our money. I think that's imperative and important. And for us, getting that feedback is really key, and it allows us to take that feedback and actually implement that policy and do the advocacy, because having just the feedback from our therapist and realizing, hey, there's an entire gap of BIPOC therapists that are not available out there. And we're talking about less than 12%. So when you're looking at that and you're seeing it and you're having these focus groups with your therapist, you're realizing, oh, the gap really comes down to the state qualification hours, the clinical hours. Every state is very differently. New Hampshire will pay you. Some states will not cover it. So it really comes down to like seeing that and seeing where that hole was is allowing us to now build out that advocacy component that we see is lacking. Because as I said before, this is a problem that we know is not a quick fix, but what are the solutions that we can apply that are tangible and easy for us to actually achieve the goals that we want to achieve? And having these principles allows us to be able to do that, where we're like, okay, we are serving our community directly, both the therapist side and the participant side. We're building the capacity for our therapists to be able to even have onboarding of the amount of participants that they're having, but also knowing that we're seeing a gap. So implementing that policy and advocacy change, and then really doing the research and the innovation and figuring out like, why is it that it's so expensive and how can we make it so that no one is having to choose between 1 week of grocery for their family versus 1 hour of therapy sessions. And that's really the fun part that I would say when it comes to philanthropy. It really is the research part and the innovation, and being able to take these risks and seeing what do you learn from them. You're going to have some wins, but you're also going to have some losses, but the losses honestly are just as great as the wins, because you're learning a lot to how to apply for your next time. So I really think it, having the principles as the guidelines for folks is imperative. And also from the philanthropy side of things, it allows us to have like our own little internal checks and balance. Hey, are we knocking off these points?
Yep. Kat?
Yeah, so I love the example Sharlene gave, and it made me think of something that ties to what Rob said earlier about philanthropy as a team sport. And that is, I remember there was a grantee that had been funded already by Greenlight Fund, one of the institutional partners I mentioned, whose due diligence we leverage. And so they gave us all of their analysis, the conversations they had with the beneficiaries, with the head of the organization. And so we started developing the exemplar that we were going to include in the toolkit. And then our team shared it with the leaders of that nonprofit. And, one of members of our team said, they almost cried. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, did we get it so wrong? And they're like, no. It's just that they didn't have to submit another proposal. They didn't have to describe, they didn't have to ask the same questions all over, answer the same questions all over again. So, but this is something that I think every donor can do. If there's an organization that you're interested in, rather than make them answer the same questions that they've already answered from another funder, why don't you go talk to the funder? And find out from that funder, why did you choose this organization? What was so interesting to you? Can you share your due diligence? I mean, that's the kind of team aspect that Rob was talking about. If we do this more collaboratively, we can reduce the burden that Sharlene was referring to, and as Rob said earlier, and we can get the money moving faster into the communities.
Excellent. And I think the concept of collaboration, is a good one. Rob, I'm going to come back to you for a second from kind of the families that you work with. There can be a lot of collaboration between families in asking each other what they're doing. There can be collaboration with advisors to say, what do you think of the best diligence? You mentioned your accounting brain can help on research. We've had some questions come in about researching grantees and how kind of making trade-offs and how to think about it. So I'd love to hear how you think about making some trade-offs.
Yep.
That as a systems thinker, that's kind of where you're using some plays. But how do you think about making trade-offs? Because obviously, I mean, there's no shortage of worthy causes.
No. And that's the thing. So it's super hard. So I see my role as philanthropy, as a conduit within that system. So my passion for philanthropy is the system of philanthropy. It's not necessarily specific to environment or early childhood or mental health. I am passionate about seeing how to get money flows through the system in different ways to affect change. So in the position that I sit in between families and nonprofits, when I was with the single family office, I had massive opportunity to sit with a whole bunch of executive directors at a partnership level to understand what's going on in their worlds and where would money be most helpful. And I know we've had questions here about trust-based philanthropy. Danisha's mentioned it as well. It's that trust-based philanthropy goes more than unrestricted dollars. It's partnering with the executive director to say, hey, what's bugging you, or what can solve a problem for you right now that's a hurdle, and or how do we manage through that process. And that learning that I did with executive directors, Carra, as we're saying here, I can bring that to families and make those connections of saying, where is it that you want to help? What is the research that you need behind it? There are plenty of places that do research. There's, CHIP is one. There's other places where to get that, but to synthesize that work towards a goal is really where I feel that's my work. And that finding the families that then connect to the nonprofits and meet their leaders where they are at that moment is massively powerful. And that's where you see real change start to happen, where something's funded directly because of executive director says, look, I just need to do this little project that's off to the side that's going to actually answer a system capacity question that I have. That's where that kind of work happens. So research and research development goes beyond that. The work that's out in the field as general. It's really kind of, as Kat said, I haven't met a donor who won't talk about their diligence to me as another donor. Like, so how do you connect them? How do you learn from them? How do you learn what worked and what didn't? And the pieces of that to then really form your own idea and identity within philanthropy, connect with nonprofits that connect that way. And that really results in long-term engagement and long-term help. And so hopefully that answers the question, at least a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it does. Anybody else want to jump in on it?
Yeah, I don't mind. I guess just kind of to add on to Kat and Rob's point on just the burdens for the nonprofits and what Sharlene said. I just want to add that, another way to do that is just like join giving circles. Like for me, joining cohorts of learning groups, whether they're educational in nature or they're collective giving circles, you kind of learn and grow together, and you have a lot of common interests, and you can share issues that you're interested in, and the way you diligence something, the way you may reach areas of growth that you want to invest in, whether that's like for me, we're looking at direct cash transfers right now. So it's helpful to reach out to the centers that do that, to other funders who do that, to really get to know, instead of me going directly to the nonprofit that's practicing it. So I really think there's a wealth of information just from other funders and other learners in the space that we could all just take advantage of each other's knowledge first. And it actually also, I think, emboldens your decision making to know that other folks are thinking about this in a similar way and, have gotten to the same conclusion based on the existing evidence. It actually makes you feel, I think, more confident about the decisions you end up making. So.
Yes, and what we want in philanthropy, of course, is for people to feel confident and excited and joyful, not overwhelmed. But you used evidence, which came up in the questions. I'm not surprised it came up in the questions. It always comes up in questions. And Kat, we're going to do you on this one, which is people always talk about people hear about best available evidence. And sometimes people struggle to figure out what is that? And is it harder in some sectors or with some plays than others? And there was a question in here that was about that, like, well, is it more cost effective to do one type of play, or how do I think about evidence in, let's say, policy change versus direct service? And I know that's something that the center has thought about for years, because it's really of interest to donors who may dabble in different fields.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. So when I said earlier, best available evidence broadly defined, in general, we're thinking about evidence from three sources, or we call them three circles of evidence. There is where available and relevant, any academic big R research evidence, or analyses off of lots of data that are relevant to your decision or the social impact area you care about. That's one source of evidence. Not every cause area or program will have that. So part of the reason you're looking at other circles of evidence is because you're trying to get the best available at this time, and evidence keeps changing. Another source, you've got the whatever the relevant research evidence is, cost effectiveness studies, et cetera. But then there's also the information from other stakeholders. This could be great case studies that give you insight into the problem. This could be policy analyses, right? These are not things you would see in an academic journal, but they help you understand the problem and what could help. And something that Sharlene talked a lot about is the direct evidence from the field, from the community that is most affected, from the beneficiaries themselves, from the folks, as Rob said, the nonprofits that are working right alongside them, right? What do they have to say? Again, not just evidence about what works, but evidence around what is the problem? What are the priorities? What hasn't worked before? And why do you think that is? When all three circles of evidence point in the same direction, that's when you get really excited. That's when we get excited. Now, one of the things, though, is evidence is not, you can't rely on the same kind of evidence for, say, a direct service play, an evidence-based tutoring program where you can set up a randomized controlled trial study, and you can have some kids who have the tutoring program and some that don't, and you can compare, and then you'll know with confidence whether or not the increased literacy is attributable to that program. Direct service lends itself to that kind of evidence, but if you're thinking about changing policy at the state level, like Georgia, or at the level of the United States, well, there is no other United States or other Georgia that will allow you to do a randomized control trial study. But more importantly, policy involves lots of stakeholders, lots of players, lots of levers. So you're not going to get the same kind of answer or evidence from an experiment in those situations. And so that gets back to what Rob said earlier. What is your tolerance for risk? And I would add, what's your tolerance for collaboration? What's your tolerance for being able to say, I contributed to that, as opposed to I did that? Because there's no one person or one grant that's going to change policy, right? So you have to have a higher tolerance for ambiguity, and you have to, like, be honest with yourself. Am I okay not embracing all the credit for this? If you aren't okay with those things, then maybe you're not going to go to a policy and advocacy play just yet, right? So these are all valid, but that question's a great one because it just illustrates some of the trade-offs with some of these plays.
And so I'm going to try to make this now. I'm going to flip that to what happened post-pandemic that changed our mind about any of those pieces, right? We had a good question about that. That was around what did our philanthropic impact, our views on it, or our thinking around it change post-pandemic, or did our roles change? Did the evidence change? Sharlene, I mean, given some of the work that you're working on, you may have some thoughts on that right out of the gate, but welcome from anybody else, how maybe work has shifted post-pandemic.
I'd say after post-pandemic, you saw a significant switch in granting. It really turned into trust-based, where more unrestricted grants were coming in and being given. And I honestly feel that right after 2020, maybe because we were a hybrid, the world felt like it was burning and people kind of just felt like, you know what, let me just give, and the need to give. And there was this collective impact of folks just feeling like they didn't need to have so much of the checks and balances, that they would be able to go and look at a guide star, look at a candid, and be able to kind of create their own synapses of an organization and get their view of it and just give blindly, where before it used to just be like, this money is only to be used for this particular thing. And that still happens. And I think that's okay, but I think there needs to be a good mixture of both. I think that, there are some cases where, yeah, it should be restricted just for that particular program, because that's what your focus really wants to be as a philanthropist. That makes sense. But I also think as philanthropists, we have to look at a nonprofit and the CEO and trust. based on their business plan, on what they're planning on do, what are their measurements. But also I always say to folks, the internet is our best friend. It could be our enemy also, but it's also our best friend. There's so many resources out there. And as philanthropists, if we can do our own due diligence of just looking at a 990 or even just looking at an annual report for the last 2 to 3 years from a nonprofit, you can really see the growth, whether some things have declined, what has declined, and then you're able to actually have a more meaningful conversation to really see like, how do you create the change that you want to see? Because there are ways to do it. It's just figuring out what are the ways, which avenue are you going to go through. But we did see after the pandemic, the amount of folks, one of the questions I did see someone threw in the chat here was $50. I could give $50. Maybe that's not enough. And one of the things I always want to emphasize is that when it comes to funding, individual donors are the number one. It's not corporations and it's not foundations. It truly is individuals. So even if you're only able to give $50, that $50, and if that's all you can give for that year, still will make a significant impact for an organization. However, when I say that $50, look for an organization that's a little smaller, because then your $50 will go a little bit further versus a large organization where you may not see the immediate that you would like to see. But that's something that I always say to folks, just because you can only give 50 doesn't mean you can't make the same impact. All of our donors on our foundation side, the majority of the funding is $5 donations. And that $5 has allowed us to provide to date $7 million directly to therapy sessions.
A really great point. Certainly one the center I know emphasizes, which is it's not how much you give, but how well you give it. Right. So I love the question of $50. It doesn't matter if it's $50 or $500 or $5 million. It's how well you give it. So thanks so much, Sharlene, for your answer. I have a question in the chat about a slight pivot on this, which is investment. I'm coming over to you, Rob, for this one, which is using investment as a strategic philanthropic tool, or I would call it a strategic tool towards your social goals. Deployment of capital towards social causes and social goals. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and how you think about that as an impact opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Investments are really an interesting part of our system. We'll keep going back to it, and elements of where it is. And investments are a tool within the system. It doesn't replace giving or other strategies, but it's enhancing what already the investment is doing. And I saw a little bit in the chat. There are opportunities. Well, for every nonprofit, not all of their dollars come from philanthropic giving. There's other resources of money, whether it's fee for services that are being even at a discounted rate, or public dollars, or something, some other connection that brings dollars into that organization. Not any organization, you can see it in the toolkit as well, relies 100% on philanthropic giving. There's always somewhere else. Investments provide another avenue to other dollars to enhance revenues of that organization. And so in partnership with the nonprofit, what would be helpful? And there are examples of real estate opportunities or buildings or low income housing. All those places are helpful if you're purchasing the land or purchasing the building that then is accessible by the nonprofit to deliver its services. That could be helpful, and that provides some level of return on your investment. There are other investments like recoverable grants, which are set out there, which put out examples of saying, hey, if certain things are achieved, other dollars will come in from public sources, federal dollars or state sources. So you're pre-funding a project that needs to show evidence to then access public dollars. That's a way to recover a grant as well. And so I look at investments, as much as there's been plenty of research and work done on impact investing and that kind of work. It's a tool in the toolbox to execute a philanthropic strategy, and done in partnership with the nonprofit to access other dollars in the public space. Massively helpful, but again, complicated in certain circumstances, recoverable grants being a little easier to understand.
Awesome. And certainly one that there's a lot of evidence in the field that's there and still being built around what type of return you can expect across the investment kind of spectrum here. So thanks for the question on that. There's a question in here around, which I think is good, about leveraging sort of more than just dollars. How do we leverage our reputation to build a portfolio, to, advocate with other funders, or to maybe advocate for government to be involved? So what can donors do to really support grantees more fully or more holistically? Who wants to take that one?
I mean, I'll say all of that, right? I mean, if you, it goes back to why one of the principles of high impact philanthropy is always considering the relationship between impact and cost, in part because we all have limited financial resources. So what other resources can you add that will help the organizations you're supporting or the cause you care about advance? Right. And I think embedded in that question are some fantastic examples, right? Use your voice. If you're in the position to be a donor or professional grant maker, that means you likely have a different network than the leaders of that nonprofit organization or than the beneficiaries of that organization. Tell them about why. Now, I mentioned earlier sharing due diligence, but tell them about why it matters. There's this whole thing about there's the message and the messenger, and don't underestimate that nonprofit has been trying to get the same message out there, but it may just be received differently or better in your network when it's being channeled through you. So that's just one example, but I think, whoever posed that question sort of embedded in that all sorts of ways you can practice high impact philanthropy that aren't restricted to the money you give.
Mm-hmm.
Can I jump in? Just with, it's also empowering the voice, building awareness. And so I've done youth development work or adolescent work here in Colorado, and there was a school who had another school shooting here last year, and the students rallied under a program we were running to say, well, how do I actually go to the Senate and talk to my senator? I'm like, well, let's talk about it. And what happened, it was a couple of hundred kids actually went and sat, and there's news articles about what they did and some of the changes that have come from it. It's part of it is that convening, part of it is that building awareness, and how can you lend your voice, your network, your convening power to build awareness of what is happening at this exact moment. And then, as Kat's saying, who's the messenger, who is authoritative, who can actually deliver that message, and can you get them to that place? That there's that element of empowering them to their voice and strengthening their voice and building that awareness across a society, locally or federally, that help that way. And it's just an example of there are people who want to do it, they just don't know how. And how do you, as a philanthropist, how do you help that come to be?
Awesome. And you just mentioned school shootings. We were talking about mental health. I mean, just issues here that are huge issues and sadly enduring issues. And one of the questions that came in, I thought was a good one, which is, we're talking about really big issues, but it's also important to look for small wins. And so, like, this is a journey we're on here. How do we think about small wins? So maybe we can just do like a lightning round of, how do you think about small wins on big problems?
I can jump in really quickly. For me and my staff, we actually do an annual self-audit. So we look at every single month at the end of the year, and we really look and see what were the highs, what were the lows. And really, how do we take the highs that we had and build on it in the next year? And what did we learn from the lows that can continue to allow us to have these amazing, great highs? And I think it really is. And we this year, we're doing more of a quarterly one, where I think sometimes when you're so much into the work and you're doing the work, you don't see it. But when you actually step back and kind of look at it from an overview, like, you're actually more impressed with, like, oh, we actually did achieve this. We didn't realize it because we were so focused on the next task. So really being able, for us, what has worked for us is really kind of having that kind of self-audit of seeing what worked, what didn't work and how do we continue to improve on it. And that's part of why we always have like this quarterly intake form for both participants and our therapists, because we always want their constant feedback. And at the end of the day, this program is for them. So how do we make this an amazing experience for them where we are providing them ease with the abundance? And I think that's always our core. How are we providing the ease with the abundance as philanthropists in terms of getting the money out there exactly where it needs to go and making sure that we are hitting our goals? So I think for us, it's more breaking it up and really looking at it and saying like, hey, actually, you know what? We broke this system. Yes, it was really bad, but the fact that we broke a system was because we had so many people trying to sign up for support. So how do we look at that and build on it? And like, okay, so now we need a bigger server. So we build a bigger server so that we don't have this problem again. I think it's looking at things like that.
I love it. Break it into small pieces. What else? How do we think about small wins on big problems?
I mean, I'd go back to get over yourself a little bit, right? This is that these big problems will only be addressed when we collectively are working. So know that, like, look for those little wins. The literacy rates have been stubbornly low in the city of Philadelphia for a very long time. But something like Children's Literacy Initiative or Springboard, like, when a kid is excited to read, when a kid picks up a book, right? That's not yet Philadelphia's literacy research, but that child's not going to unlearn reading, right? And that's going to be a path to impact for his, her, their life going forward. So I sort of feel like there are small wins everywhere, as long as you take the pressure off you that you're the one or your foundation is going to solve this big issue. Look at how what you're doing is improving the life of someone. You know, that's the first unit of analysis, right? There's someone whose life is better because of what you did, right? And I think if you start there, you will start seeing all sorts of small wins with your philanthropy.
Very well.
I
Go
can
ahead,
jump
Danisha.
into just briefly, I think it's like I tell us, like I tell our family, if we're giving someone an opportunity or someone an access point to better their lives or to give them dignity and respect and patient care, then I feel like that is going to be a win at the end of the day. It may not be the necessary, like the outcome we all want, but like you said, Kat, these are complex problems and they're not going to resolve themselves with tomorrow. So we just all have to like have faith that what we're doing is gonna all eventually move the needle a little bit, and and we tweak and learn as we grow, and and be willing to adapt and share and connect with our peers and our learning groups and each other, and just share our stories and keep advocating, like you said, Rob, keep sharing and keep spreading awareness.
Fantastic. Well, maybe what I'll do is maybe Rob will give you a second if because we've heard from most folks and we're close on time. It goes so quickly. So maybe Rob, one last thought you'd offer on either on big wins or big problems and small wins, or how you're using the toolkit or how you're practicing high impact philanthropy and others might. One last thought you'd have to offer on that.
Sure. Thanks. It's my small win. I'll just add it to the group is watching those kids walk to the Capitol was a win. It was nothing that had to do with their program. They self-organized. They sat with their senators. Like just even progress points along the way are small wins. And any grant that I've ever written, there are always pieces of time that's like, oh, there it is. Or as a toolkit example, a cook stove is being used. Awesome. Is it being used by 1 million people? Maybe not, but there are a few. Like there are always places to find that hook that you're still doing. And then from the toolkit itself, I just encourage when you're looking at your projects, the questions are really interesting way to think about your due diligence or your research is why is this needed? What does it do? How effective is it? And how does philanthropy help? Really, at the end of the day, diligence doesn't need to be more complicated than that. It's to really understanding behind the scenes of where you are and what stage the organization is in their work, and then supporting it, understanding how a short-term help can help or a long-term. And then the last is I do appreciate the toolkit addressing common current issues like disaster relief and fraud, which are 100% a question that comes up all the time because there's a natural disaster that happens every day, and being quick to be able to respond to those things are tools that in the toolkit that we all need to have as well. So that would be my use of the toolkit and my small win.
Awesome. Thank you. Kat, maybe I'll turn it to you last for a closing comment on how you hope everybody here will use this toolkit and keep practicing.
I mean, just start it. We make this available for free every year so that no matter where you are on the path to impact, you've got some help. And so download it, visit it, and just start. That's the first step.
Awesome. Well, I am so grateful to my panelists here for sharing all their wisdom, and I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly here in a second. But I think there's a poll that might already be happening, or we're going to send a survey out subsequently. Please let us know your feedback. We really hope this was helpful, and we want to hear from you and keep engaged with you. And Kelly, over to you.
Thank you, everyone, especially to our panelists, our Elaine Martyn, who greeted us, and our moderator, Carra Cote-Ackah. And thank you all for being here today. We're going to send a recording of this out with a link to the toolkit so you can use it yourselves. And everyone, have a good day and keep giving. Thanks.